sedes en el estado. La jornada inicia el 28 de abril, el día de hoy, y bueno, pues está también ya el proceso comunicado hacia el interior de los campus, cómo se llevaría a cabo ahí no está dentro de nuestra sede. Profesores y colaboradores de los 5 campus que participaron en la jornada la semana pasada fueron vacunados. Yo creo que
Bienvenidos al seminario SWIT. Estamos por empezar y en un momentito más vamos a poner una pieza de música que el doctor Robert Tibshirani, él toca también el piano. Mientras, podemos... In which city are you now, everybody? In what place? Let me share. Okay.
Which city? The answer? Or do we
In which city are you now, everybody? This is a Menti. Here is the code. You can enter with www.menti.com and use this number 1883-0507. Monterrey. Monterrey, Mexico City, Tampico. Matamoros, León, Guanajuato. Muy bien, Monterrey. We are listening now the music of Dr. Robert Tibshirani.
You should.
Piano.
I'm not a professional, so you should turn it off. I'm an amateur.
No, it's very good. Okay. And now you're in Palo Alto?
It's me.
Okay. Cuernavaca. Okay. Have you been in Mexico?
I've never been to Mexico. No.
No? Oh. You need to come.
I'd like to. Yeah.
Okay. Let's start. Okay. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the SWIT seminars with IT pioneers and leaders. Thanks to Dr. Robert Tibshirani for being with us in Tecnológico de Monterrey, in Monterrey, Mexico. Thanks to Dr. Manuel Certuche, Dean of the School of Engineering. Thanks to Dr. Joaquín Acevedo, Dean of the School of Engineering in North Region. Thanks to Dr. José Alfredo Galván, Director of Division in North Region. Thanks to Dr. José Antonio Rentería, Director of Division in North Region. Thanks to Ingeniero Luis Ricardo Salgado, Director of the Computer Department. Thanks to Montserrat Cruz, coordinator of SWIT, Seminars with IT Pioneers and Leaders, who has coordinated the conference, also with Dr. Robert Metcalf, Dr. Steve Crocker, Dr. Leonard Kleinrock, Dr. Tahel El Gamal, Dr. Leslie Lamport. Dr. Vince Cerf was with us in 2018. And thanks to everybody in this session, I am Rafael Davalos, leader of the SWIT program. Welcome, Dr. Robert Tibshirani. He is well known for his contribution in statistics with the LASSO method. He developed statistical tools for the analysis of complex data sets, most recently in genomics and proteomics. He is fellow of the Royal Society of in London. He is fellow for the Royal Society of Canada. He received the COPS President's Award, among many other rewards. And we appreciate your time and effort to be with us. Welcome, Dr. Robert Tibshirani.
Thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation and nice to meet everyone. So my plan is I'm going to give I have about 23 slides. I'm going to give a sort of a high level talk. And that'll take maybe half an hour, and then hopefully we'll have maybe close to half an hour at the end for questions and conversation. So that's and if there are questions during the talk, please feel free to just interrupt me. I prefer it that way. If there's things that aren't clear, or along the way, please just interrupt me. If that's, since we're using this kind of format, I think you can just use the chat, or I probably won't see the chat. Just speak up if you have a question. So, curiosity and momentum, some thoughts from my career in statistics. So I'm 64, I'll be 65 this year, although I have no intention of retiring, but I'm getting to the age when it's when I'm thinking about winding down, but I'm still working hard, enjoying myself. So I wanted to this talk is sort of things I've learned over my career, in the hopes that it can be useful, especially to young people who are just starting off their careers. So, in the outline in general, some general words of advice. That'll be most of the talk, and then the story of the lasso, which is a topic which has been a big part of my career, and I'm continuing to work on it. And there'll be some ties to in the first part to the second part. Okay, so just a sort of a one-slide biography. I was born in 1956 in Niagara Falls, Ontario. I'm Canadian, and I did my PhD down here at Stanford. Went back, well, here we go. So I did a bachelor's in Waterloo and a master's in Toronto, PhD at Stanford under Brad Efron, the inventor of the bootstrap, who's still an emeritus professor here. Brad's about 83 years old now. I went back to Toronto for 12 years as a professor, returned to Stanford now 23 years ago as a professor, and I've been here ever since. I have 3 children, Charlie, Ryan, and Julie. Charlie's a product manager. My oldest son, my middle son is actually a statistician at Carnegie Mellon University. He's already very well known. And my daughter, Julie, is a software engineer. She's the youngest. She narrowly avoided going into statistics. She's actually a computer scientist, but she does machine learning as a hobby with her husband, who's also, she married a statistician, one of Brad Efron's students. His name is Stefan Vaugher, and they live nearby, and she works on random forests as a hobby. They have a well-known package called Generalized Random Forest, which they developed together. So she's not a statistician, but she's awfully close. So it's quite a family of statisticians. My son's a statistician, my son-in-law is a statistician, and my daughter is almost a statistician. So, okay. So I put together like a top 10 list of just things that I think, things I've learned over my life about, in statistical life. And of course, the last one is to be careful about giving advice to young people. So I'm going to do it anyway, but with some caution. Okay. So I won't read them now, but I'll go through them basically one slide at a time. So don't get discouraged, is the first thing. So again, this is aimed at, I guess, researchers, statisticians, computer science of any age. I mean, young or old. Scientists, and especially statisticians, are born critics, right? So it may or may not surprise you to hear that most of my papers, for example, are rejected on first submission. Like, it doesn't matter how well known you are, so you get, it's a constant rejection. It's very rare to have something, you go send it to a journal and they say, wonderful, we're going to publish it. They always have something to complain about, right? And that's true in every field. Maybe statisticians are worse because they're born critics. We're trained to be critical, right? So as a referee, when you get a paper, your first instinct is what's wrong with it? Where are the holes? What's it? So, and that is good in some ways, but also means it can be very hard on your morale, right? Small perturbations of existing ideas are more accepted or more easily accepted than more ambitious papers. So if you take a published paper and you make a small change to the author's idea, you can get it published more easily than something which is very original and groundbreaking. The original paper on false discovery rates by Benjamin Hochberg, you can read the story about that Benjamini writes. It took 5 years to publish it in 3 journals. Like, this is one of the great papers of the century. It took them 5 years to convince anybody to take it. You know, journals were rejecting it. So when you hear this story, you don't be discouraged, because, you know, even the great papers can have a lot of pushback. They're not accepted right away. I once had a paper rejected by the Annals of Statistics when I was younger, because I had only one good idea. Well, if I got that today, I'd say, well, that's one good idea. What's wrong with that? If we all have a couple good ideas per year, that's pretty good, isn't it? So the complaint was only one good idea it really wasn't very fair, but I was too young to really complain, push back. But you should fight back with editors. Make sure they understand what's in your paper. Remember that referees and editors are overworked. They're volunteers, right? They're like, all of us are referees and editors, right? And we have too much work to do. So often the case is, if you get a paper rejected, they didn't read it carefully because they didn't have time. So it's a matter of, you know, just take the criticism constructively. Sometimes they're good comments, and just try to meet the referees and editors halfway. You know, if they reject a paper, say, well, thank you for your comments. You know, and you made some good comments, and we want to do the following. So it's you know, whatever age you are, whatever place in your career, you're going to get rejected all the time. Don't be discouraged. We're all in the same boat. So that's the first point. Think first, read second. So I try to do this. Think hard about a problem before seeing what everyone else is doing. And with the web, it makes it even harder, right? Because it's so easy to, with a couple of keystrokes, to see what the whole world has done within a problem, right? Because it's all on the web. But I think that's not a good thing to do. You should sort of think about a problem first, think about how you would solve it, so that you don't fall into the same rut other people's. Maybe it's already well solved, but most likely, if it's an important problem, there's something new to do. So think about it first yourself. Try things for weeks before you just look to see what other people have done, because, you know, again, that'll increase the chance that you do something original. My supervisor, Brad Efron, took one course in differential geometry, and then he wrote this paper called The Geometry of Exponential Family that started a whole new field. He knew very little about differential geometry. He took one course at Stanford as a graduate student, and that's Brad. I mean, he's a genius, right? But he basically takes one course in a topic, and then he just invents a new field. Now, we can't all do that, but the point is, you know, think more than you read. Like, you can read later. Think yourself first, okay? So I said that here. Yeah, so here's, you know, it led to a whole new subfield of statistics invented by someone who knew very little differential geometry, right? So, okay. Work on real applications. This is my bias, but it's a strong bias. You know, I find that I do a lot of cross-disciplinary work with people at Stanford and other places, and there's a wonderful, you know, cross-fertilization. Like, I work with people in medicine, they bring me a problem, I talk to them. The current solution is not very good, so that suggests to me a new problem in statistics that needs to be, you know, a new set of tools that are needed for a certain area of biology, and there's a cross-fertilization. And when I first came to Stanford, the gene expression arrays were a big thing, and David Botstein and Pat Brown were some of the inventors of that. These people were at Stanford in biology. But, you know, although I came as a full professor, I couldn't even, these guys didn't have time to talk to me. They were so busy and important. So I started at the bottom of the food chain. You know, I talked to their postdocs. And after a year, I understood more of the problem, and eventually I became very good collaborators with these guys. But you know, you just do what you have to do to get involved, whether you're a professor, whether you're a student, right? Spend time trying to understand a scientist's problem, show respect for their work. As statisticians or computer science, we might think that we have a corner on quantitative thinking. You know, we're trained to be quantitative, you know, thinkers. We're mathematicians. Well, that's not, you'd be surprised that scientists who are not trained in mathematics, they know a lot about quantitative things. They have a very good sense for their problem and the quantitative aspects of their problem. Try to understand what they're saying, because you can learn a lot from people who you don't think know much math, okay? And they might not know much math. That doesn't mean they don't know, they don't have good intuition for mathematics. And another point with real applications, when you find good collaborators, spend time like developing those and keeping them, because they're valuable and rare. You know, I have maybe half a dozen collaborators at Stanford and around the world that I work with all the time, and they're wonderful. But you have to spend time, you know, you spend time working with them, and you know, there's always a grant proposal due in a couple of days, and there'll be a rush, and all that's part of the relationship. But those relationships are very, very valuable. Okay, and they don't happen just by chance. You have to work on them. It's like a marriage or something. You work on it, right? There's good and bad times. Okay. Strive for simplicity. So this is another sort of one of my pet peeves. I think, you know, this is a quote by Da Vinci: "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." Now, I believe that good ideas are usually simple, a view not shared by everyone. And you learn from, if you read about Einstein and Feynman and Brad Efron, they all looked at sort of simple examples that shed light on important issues, right? And examples of that, like the book by Feynman and the biography of Feynman by James Glick. But what do I mean by this? I find that people often with advanced degrees tend to overcomplicate things. Like very often I'm asked to speak to a postdoc in medical school, and they have some idea they've done a statistical analysis of some medical data, something genetics, genomics, right? And typically it goes, you know, they start, here's my data, and they want me to look it over. And here's the data, then they applied this package, and then they found this other package, and then they did this. And then after half an hour, they've got some colorful graph where they think they claim they found some relationship between gene number 7 and heart disease or something, right? And it's extremely complicated pipeline. And this is, people always do this. And first of all, the first problem is I can't judge what I'm seeing here, because you see this pipeline with all these arbitrary choices and packages I'm not familiar with. And the end of it, you get this colorful graph that looks impressive, but who knows sort of if it's real or whether it's spurious, whether they tried 100 things and they're showing you the best thing, right? And I thought about this. Why does this happen? Well, people with advanced degrees tend to overcomplicate things, and I'm guilty of this too. I try not to be, but because we have advanced degrees, like we figure I have a PhD, so I can't just do a regression or a scatter plot. I have to do something complicated. I have to fit a neural network, or I have to use this advanced model because I have a PhD after all, right? Well, that's the wrong attitude. Actually, making things simple is actually harder. If you can come up with a result for a data analysis that's simply shown by a graph or a single regression analysis, that's success. If you have to use a neural network or a lasso or something more complicated, that might be necessary, but it shouldn't be your first instinct. The first instinct is to should be trying to make things simple, right? Both for it to understand it and to explain it to your collaborators, right? If I bring a neural network analysis to a collaborator and say, look how well it predicts heart disease, his or her first question will be, how does it work? Okay, you put in 500 features, patient features, is predicting heart disease. Well, how does it work? Like, what features are important? And I have a lot of trouble explaining that if it's a neural network. So again, neural networks have their role, but they're complicated. So all I'm saying is start simple and only complicate things when you need to. Don't feel good when things are complicated. You should feel bad. Okay, feel proud of yourself if you did something simple and it worked. That's really the ultimate success. So, okay, be skeptical, right? And I guess, again, statisticians do this all the time. Jerome Friedman, very famous statistician, one of my colleagues here, invented CART and gradient boosting. He's now emeritus here, and I've written with him many times. He grew up, he was a physicist. He's not impressed by mathematics. He doesn't know mathematics. He didn't train in statistics. His attitude is, show me an example where it works. He wants to just show me it working. He's got fantastic intuition. He doesn't do mathematical theorems and things. He wants to know, what's the problem? What are the assumptions? And does it work? That's all he cares about. And he's been a tremendously successful researcher because he's extremely practical. Here's another example of again, the interplay between mathematics and practicality. Tommy Poggio is a well-known researcher from MIT in neural networks. Well, I've known him sort of somewhat for the last 30 years. He said, neural networks grew up in the 1980s, right, essentially. And at that point, I don't know if you guys know about neural networks, there were single hidden layer networks. So there was the inputs, the hidden layer, and the outputs, right? And people proved theorems in the mid 80s that showed approximation theorems showing that you only need one layer. Basically, if you make the layer wide enough, you can approximate any smooth function arbitrarily well. So it's a mathematical result. And that the results were true. But according to Tomio, this set the field back 30 years, because what happened was no one tried using more than one hidden layer because the mathematicians told them we don't need to. Mathematicians have told us one layer is enough. And it wasn't until the 2000s, according to Tommy, that people thought about deep learning, which was multiple layers, right? And that's been the huge breakthrough in neural nets in the last 10 or 15 years was the multiple layers of deep learning, right? But the mathematicians, again, because the mathematicians proved a theorem, people took it too seriously, right? Mathematics doesn't capture all the aspects of the problem. So, math is nice, but don't take it too seriously. It's not the only story. And here's an example, again, in turn to Tommy, where it set the field back by 30 years by taking a theorem too seriously. And again, being skeptical is a very good attitude. And here's an example. I just have a real example from this wonderful book called The Emperor of All Maladies, a biography of cancer by Siddhartha Mukherjee. So this is Halstead, who was a famous breast surgeon in the 20s at Johns Hopkins, and he was like the world's most famous breast surgeon. And he invented the radical mastectomy for the treatment of breast cancer in the 20s. It became the standard treatment for the field. In the radical mastectomies, you remove the breast and you remove like some of the muscle behind it. And as time went on, and he was basically sort of the king of the whole field, surgeons would do the radical mastectomy and they make it more and more radical. They figured, okay, well, if a patient has a radical mastectomy and they died, maybe we didn't take enough out. So people did more radical, and it was bad in terms of disfiguring for poor women. And few doctors dared to challenge the conventional wisdom because of how his stature. He was like the king of the area, and you didn't dare do anything but a radical mastectomy, right? And then, and this is all from this book, by the way, but you can see the details of body cancer. Then finally in 1958, Dr. Fisher of the University of Pittsburgh managed to run the first clinical trial comparing radical mastectomy to less invasive treatments, right? I mean, it took him 30 years, it took anyone 30 years to even get permission to run the trial, because it was thought that if you don't do a radical mastectomy, you're not giving the right treatment to patients. And his work showed that actually for early stage cancer, radical mastectomy was not any better than much less invasive procedures, right? So it's I mean, in some ways it's tragic, because for 30 years, women had these terrible operations, many of whom should not have had those operations. But because of the bias of the medical profession, it took a skeptical person and a lot of effort to finally convince people that radical mastectomy was not the right treatment for many women. Okay. Again, if there's questions as we go along, please ask me. I'll pause here for a moment if there's questions about what you've seen so far. Nothing? Okay, next one, spend time with experts. So, if you're a postdoc, try to spend time around top people. If you do a postdoc at a place where there's well-known professors that are active, besides learning a lot, you'll find out they're human. They work hard, they have self-doubts, they get nervous. Like when you meet people that are famous, you think, oh my God, I'm meeting this famous person. Everything's so easy for them. It's not so easy for them, right? They're human like everybody else. And I'm the same way. I mean, I work hard, I have doubts, I get nervous before talks. I mean, and when you learn that, it's reassuring that you're not. All of us humans are very similar, right? Read the papers of experts, look for new ideas, things that haven't yet mined. I did this as a student at Brad's. He'd come out with his next grade paper, and I'd read it, and I'd think, gee, maybe I could take what he did and I could generalize it. But honestly, he was so thorough that it didn't happen very often. But just being around Brad as a supervisor was wonderful, just to see the way he thinks, right? He's a brilliant man, and just being able to spend time with him was a wonderful experience. So if you have a chance to do that, either as a graduate student or a postdoc, can be very helpful. Collaborate with people whose skills complement yours. So I've done a lot of collaboration. I have very few papers I've written on my own. My longtime collaborator and friend Trevor Hasty is we've done everything together, written many books together. He's better at me than computing. He's more careful than me. So we have a very our relationship is, and it's like a marriage really. We complement each other. We fight sometimes, but we work very well together because our skills are complementary. Brad Efron, my supervisor, John Taylor, and now my son Ryan, I mentioned at Carnegie Mellon, he's better at me than most things. Okay, well that's progress. That's wonderful. So, but in the best collaborations, the whole exceeds the sum of the parts. So, like I'm still working with people I knew in graduate school, like Trevor. Right, I met him in graduate school at Stanford, and we've been collaborators now for 40 years. Boy, so. Because we're good friends and we work well together. So if you can find someone like that, work on it. It's really, really valuable, both on the personal level and the scientific level. Whoops. Respect and listen to researchers in other fields. I kind of mentioned this already, that people in other fields have good ideas. Like in the mid 80s, I started meeting the people of machine learning. Jeff Hinton was my colleague in Toronto when I was there. Jeff Hinton, of course, is one of the inventors of neural networks. He won the Turing Prize a couple of years ago for that, along with other people. And I met a lot of people in machine learning in other areas. They have wonderful ideas, right? So a lot of my work is spawned by hearing other people doing other fields and then trying to translate that into statistics, right? And for example, the boosting work of Fournier and Shapiro was an example of that directly, where Trevor, Jerry, and I, we read their boosting work and we basically translated it into statistics. We found them, and that turned out to be an annals paper on boosting, and that led to the gradient boosting work of Friedman. So people in other areas have a lot to teach you. Sometimes it's hard to listen because their language is different, the terminology is different, but spend the time because there's a lot of smart people in other fields that you can learn from. Read their papers, go to conferences. Deep learning is a much more recent example where there's wonderful ideas there, which I look at and I think, well, how do I apply that to more traditional statistical models like the lasso? And I've had a number of cases where I've seen what people are doing in deep learning, and I've translated it into something which is more statistical and applicable in more familiar models. Overall, don't be a scientific snob. Don't think that what we're doing somehow is the only, the data science is the be all and end all. There's lots of wonderful work going on in many fields, and lots to learn and lots to teach them too. So write good software. So this is something that's taken me a while to learn, but the importance of software for technology transfer, right? Given a choice, people will use not the optimal method, but the one with the best software. So if you publish a paper in, say, the Journal of American Statistical Association or some major journal, and it's 5% better than the best thing that exists, but you don't have good software, people are not going to use it, right? We're all so busy. No one has time to write their own implementations. Or if you write a package and the first time someone tries it, it breaks, forget it, right? People move on to something else. So spending time on software is really important. And I have my graduate students now, when they come up with a method, publish a method, if it's appropriate, they write a good software package in R usually. They put it on CRAN, the repository, and they support it and they develop it. It's a very essential part of research. If you want your work to get used, you have to write good software and support it. And our GlimNet package, which I'll talk about in a few minutes now, is a big example of this for the lasso. So the lasso, the main implementation is in this package called GlimNet, and that's been a huge part of the success of the method, is that there's software for people to try it. Without software, it's going to be in some journal, no one's going to read it, right? Software is the way that we transfer ideas into practice in our field, right? Very important. And again, if there's people out there who are chairs of departments or professors, you should reward students who write good software. That should be considered research. It's not just something you do at the end, it's actually part of the research. So again, I emphasize that with my students. So curiosity and momentum, this was the title of my talk. Well, this is sort of it's a general thing. If you have an idea for something, just start working on it. Like very often I'll have a graduate student who'll start with me and we'll meet, we'll have a problem. I'll discuss a problem with them and I'll meet them once a week and come back to me after a week. And then she said, Professor, I really didn't make any progress. I said, well, what did you try? Well, I tried to write something down and couldn't drive anything. So, well, my advice here is just do something. Like, you know, when I think back, actually, it's the last point. I left out a word there. When I publish a paper I'm proud of, I look back at where it started. Most often it started a long, let's just say, way from where it ended up. So you can't plan research. No one sits, I don't think anyone sits down and says, I'm going to solve problem X. And they just go in a linear fashion solve problem X. For me, it's like, I have an idea about something. I talk to some in the medical school. They've got this problem, and I don't think there's any good ways of solving it so far. So I'm going to try something. I just try something on the computer. It doesn't work. Okay, so then I try something else, and then I rethink the problem, and then you know I sort of wind. You know, it's sort of a long winding road. Most of the things you try don't work. You know, but then eventually when you succeed, you look back where you started. It was a very different place. You couldn't have planned it, right? But the moral of the story is just move forward in some direction. It's better than standing still. You might be moving in the wrong direction, but as long as you get some momentum, eventually you'll lead to a good place, usually. And you can't plan it. But what I'm saying is that research is largely experimental. It's not planned. You know, some students will read a paper by some famous like David Cox, think, boy, that guy's a genius. How did he ever think of that? And they imagine that he planned it out. Like he was given the problem, and he just wrote it out the paper. That's not how it worked, I'm sure. You know, that he was given a problem, he tried one formulation, it didn't work. He tried something else, it didn't work. He tried 3 more things that didn't work. Finally got something that kind of worked. And then, you know, and eventually he probably made his way to a good solution. But it's not a linear path. So just move forward in some direction. Experiment on the computer, try things. And hopefully you'll get to a good place eventually. And I can tell you most of my work is up that way. It wasn't planned. You know, I had some idea where I started, but I didn't really know where I was going to end up. You just have to have the self-confidence to keep moving forward. And you always have to know when to give up too. There's been times when I've worked on a problem for too long, and finally I said, this is not solvable. This is not, you have to know when to move on. That happens too. So it's always hard to drop something when you've worked on it for months and you haven't succeeded. So, okay. So this is the last thing. I just want to tell the story of the lasso, because it's kind of for me, it's probably my biggest success story, but it was developed in 95, 96 when I was a young professor in Toronto before I moved back to Stanford. And it was inspired by Bryman's garrote. Now, by the way, I'll define the lasso on the next slide in case you didn't know what it was. But this is a case where Leo Bryman, this was a case where the idea was clearly inspired by a single paper, namely Bryman's garrote, which was kind of his two-stage procedure, which basically did least squares and then multiplied the least squares estimates by non-negative constants. I saw that now. That's interesting, but it looks sort of too complicated. So I streamlined it, and that's where the lasso came out. And being a Canadian, I wanted something whose name was a little softer. Like garrote sounded pretty, you know, it's something I think you hang. It's what a hangman uses. So that sounded pretty cruel. So I wanted a nicer name. And then honestly, the paper got published, and nothing really happened for 5 or 10 years. Like I never got any emails about it or anything. But eventually, computation sort of caught up with the idea. Like, you know, it's a convex optimization. As computers got faster, data got bigger, it started to get more and more attention. And now it's, you know, it's a pretty big thing. Like I've had 39,000 citations. There's multiple versions of graphical lasso, adaptive lasso. It's still a very hot topic. You know, I'm proud of it, but it took a long time for it to get any traction. So what is the lasso? I'll just sort of mostly end with that. It's a method for what's called supervised learning. You've got some predictors or features that you measure on people, say, and you've got something you're trying to predict, like a phenotype in a medical setting, or maybe you're trying to predict the return of a stock, and you know things about the companies for which you're trying to predict. The lasso is basically least squares regression, minimize the sum of squares, with a constraint on the sum of the absolute values of the weights or parameters, right? And in this constraint, you choose a bound. This is a user-defined parameter. So it's like a budget. You say, I'm going to do least squares with a budget on how much I can spend on the weights. If this budget's very large, if this budget's infinity, you're just going to get least squares regression. There's no constraint. But as the budget gets tighter and tighter, the method is forced to basically constrain the coefficients, to spend the coefficients in where they get the most bang for the buck, choose the non-zero coefficients to be as predictive as possible, right? To put weight on the feature predictive. That's called sparsity. So it gives you a sparse solution, which I'll show. In other words, if the budget is low enough, it'll choose many of the beta j's to be zero. It'll say, I don't need that feature. It's not worth spending any money on. So, and the nice thing is convex problems, so you can solve this for very large problems. Subset selection, where you simply choose the non-zero guys, that's a combinatorial problem, and it can't really be solved essentially for the number of variables more than, say, 50 or 60. But the lasso can be solved for millions of variables with good algorithms, on a reasonable, even on a laptop computer. So the convexity is very, very important. And this is just a picture of why the lasso gives a sparse solution. This is ridge regression, which you've probably heard of, right? Where it's just the lasso, but with a sum of the budgets on the sum of the squares. And this is the lasso with the budgets on the sum of the absolute values. Well, the lasso ridge regression says, well, here's the overall least squares estimates. Here are the contours of the objective function, the ellipses. And here's the constraint region where sum of beta j squared is less than some number, the radius of this blue circle. This is all for p equals 2. So ridge regression says, find me the first time my contours hit the blue region. Right? And you can see because this blue region is a circle, you're very unlikely to hit either here, where beta 1 is 0, or here, where beta 2 is 0. But the lasso has corners. The constraint region is the sum of the absolute values. So if it hits here, then beta 1 is 0, right? So because of the fact that this constraint region has corners and higher dimensions, it has edges, you get sparsity, depending on the budget you pick. And the budget you choose based on what's called cross-validation. But that's a different story for another talk. So that's just, if you like geometry, this is why this absolute value constraint, which looks like very similar to the sum of the squares, is actually very crucial to giving you sparsity. Okay. And there's an example, this is from our textbook in prostate cancer, where you can see here's the least squares estimates. And as you decrease the budget, they start to shrink. Eventually, like this guy here hits 0. So he's been thrown out because the budget's too tight and the model doesn't want to spend any money on this variable, basically. So that's just for example. Okay. And so the lasso gives you sparsity, which is really important nowadays when we get data sets which have very, very wide data sets with hundreds or thousands or millions of features, most of which aren't useful, right? A typical experiment now, people will, we have a few hundred patients, we're trying to predict whether they're going to get cancer. We've measured, 500,000 things on these patients, proteomics and gene expression, and we don't know what's predictive. So the lasso is able to sort of sort through this large set of features and try to decide what's predictive and what's not. So sparsity is a very, very powerful notion. And the lasso gives you both sparsity and also the convexity makes the computation easier. So, and one big reason for our popularity is software, getting back to software. So again, these are my two colleagues, Trevor and Jerry. Jerry is one of my teachers and Trevor is my co-author and colleague. We've written this package called GlimNet. It's been around now for 10 years. It's had over 3 million downloads around the world. Very proud of this. It's Freeman's an old-time programmer. The numerics are actually written in Fortran, which, like I know, for example, when I tell my daughter this, she has got a degree in computer science, she laughs at me like, Fortran, oh my God, you're a dinosaur, right? Nobody uses Fortran anymore. But actually, a good Fortran program can make a program as efficient as you can in C or any other language. So it's a very, very, very fast algorithm with a lot of new features. We develop it. We're still developing it. And Trevor gets most of the credit for that. He's the main maintainer. It's got many tricks. And it's widely used around the world. Like a lot of people use it. And there's a version in Python and etc. But so this is a big, I guess this just reemphasizes the importance of software. Like Trevor and I spend a lot of time still on WimNet. You know, it's research, it's important research. It's so gratifying to see people actually using your methods, right? So, okay, so that's my last slide. I've distilled down my list of 10 to 4. Think first, read second. Strive for simplicity. Collaborate with people whose skills complement yours. Be curious and develop momentum in your work. It's better to be moving in some direction than to stand still. And just to wrap up, say good luck to everybody and best wishes. So that's all I have to say, and I'm happy to take questions or comments now.
Thank you, Dr. Tibshirani. So if you have a question, you may raise your hand with the Zoom option, and I'll be calling you. Gabriela Flores.
Yes, thank you first for your presentation and your tips. My question is, which challenges do you believe we as social science students are currently facing or going to face in the next years regarding statistics?
Social science students, I mean, one big area is causal inference is a big area, I think, in social sciences too, right? Trying to figure out if I intervene in some way, like in the medical area, you intervene with a treatment, or in the social studies area, might be you intervene with some kind of a program of some sort. What effect is it likely to have? So we call that the area of causal inference, right? And it's a difficult area because in causal inference, you don't get to see both outcomes, right? Like in a clinical trial, if you give a patient either treatment A or treatment B, you want to know which is better, A or B, you don't get to see how the patient would have done under the other treatment, right? You only get one treatment. So it's a kind of supervised learning, but it's very difficult because you don't get to see the counterfactual, they call it. So I think causal inference is really important in many areas, including social studies, economics, finance, and medicine. So that's the one that comes to mind most. And another one that's been, again, another hot topic is algorithmic fairness, right? When we have an algorithm that tries to help you decide whether someone should be let out of prison, or someone should get a grant or whatever, these algorithms, as we've learned now, can be very biased against certain races and genders. And so trying to figure out ways of making these things fair would be an important area for social studies as well.
Thank you, and thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Edna Rojas.
Hi, let me tell you that it's a privilege to have the opportunity to talk with you. And nice to meet you, Robert.
Thank you.
I have 3 questions, if you don't mind. The first one is a more technical questions, and the other 2 are more about the context in which we do research. The first one about the technical issues is, in the biomedical field, we often get to handle biomarkers that are not taken at fixed intervals of time. Like, I don't know, because it doesn't depend of a mechanical sensor. If some nurse takes the temperature or the oxygen saturation, there is no fixed interval for those measures of the biomarker. What will be your advice to do the handling of these time series that are not in fixed intervals?
But is the purpose here to do some kind of a prediction of disease or something?
Yeah, I was building a COVID-19 mortality risk prediction.
Yeah. Well, usually what I do is you construct features like slopes, for example, like you have features measured over time, whether or not they're equal intervals, like construct features which measure how they change, right? Like slopes.
Yeah, we use the maximum and the minimum, but something like that is the best you can do?
Yeah, I mean, you really have to experiment. Yeah, use the range or maybe a back average or slope, right? To capture, because often it's not the levels of biomarkers, but the changes that are actually important. So
Okay, so it depends on the behavior of the biomarkers, then you choose a new feature, then you'll be included. Thank you. Thank you. And the other two questions is, I know that I really feel what you said about not being a scientific snob. And what I see in our context is that in one side, there is already the technology and all the research to really make more value or to make possible really sophisticated and simple solutions to fix real problems. And in Latin American, especially, we don't have enough data. We don't have enough, like a broad knowledge of statistics, but we do have a lot of tools, like we have cloud, we have a lot of, I don't know, technology tools that we can use to build a lot of things. But my specific questions would be, if you were in an environment in which there is very scarce data and no so many statistician expertise, but a lot of tools and a lot of software developers, what will be your advice to promote innovation, especially around developing mobile health apps to improve healthcare systems?
Well, let me ask, what kind of scientist are you? Where's your background?
My background is computer science, but I'm also working right now in healthcare.
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, that's multiple. I know it's harder to work in an environment where you don't have as much support or colleagues. I mean, the one good news is the web, of course, gives you access to huge amounts of data. Like I mentioned, my son, Ryan, for example, I wanted to put up Ryan and colleagues at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh developed this thing called COVIDcast, which I'm actually involved in myself for almost a year now. But this is basically the largest collection of data, COVID data in the United States, and it's all available for free. And what they've done, I mean, they have sort of the standard things like the number of cases from Johns Hopkins. And they also have unique surveys that they're doing with Facebook, for example. There's a Facebook survey which they negotiated, and they started with Facebook, which it asks people at random about 20 questions about their COVID symptoms. Are they wearing masks? Have you had a vaccine? And this data is now, there's something like 2 or 3 million responses. It's one of the largest health surveys in history. Yeah. It's all available on their website for free in their API. So there's a tremendous resource of COVID data there, which is, and plus tools they've developed in R and Python for analyzing it. So the good news is that the web allows you to access huge amounts of data and software for free. Now, that doesn't solve all your problems, because you still need, you want some colleagues, you want some statisticians. Well, I'm not sure what to suggest there. If you can strike up collaborations with people in other cities, like I collaborate with people in Texas and Boston, and so because of the web and Zoom, you can effectively do collaborations with people far away. So if you can strike up collaborations with someone in other cities, other countries.
Okay. Specifically, what I did was to collect data from hospitals at Spain. But the fact is that I'm building something that is for clinical use. Yeah. That's very difficult here because our hospitals don't have digital equipment. They don't have data. So although there is data from other countries, that's not data from our Mexican population. And so it's like, yes, you have a model and it's a very nice model, but it's built on another population. So we don't trust on it, and we are not, you know, the trust issues and things like that are important. And but yes, it's how do we promote the importance of data creations around the healthcare system, and how do we foster innovation? Because I also see that there is a lot of possibility to turn our mobile phones into clinical monitoring devices.
Yeah.
But we don't have the, I think over there, the limit is that we don't have the more, I don't know, perhaps we have software engineers and software developers who can build apps, but we don't have the expertise to build like an application that has a sound statistical background to monitor a signal to work as a clinical device. And that part is the part that is missing. Not that we cannot build the app, not that if we build it, a lot of people can use it, but because millions in Latin America can use mobile phones. But the last part, to connect like a sound statistical background to analyze the signal, you see, that's the missing.
Well, maybe I can suggest, I mean, if you send me an email, like there's someone here at Stanford Medical School that's very, very big in developing mobile phone apps. And I mean, they're working with data in the Bay Area, but I mean, if he was willing to collaborate with you and, you know, take some of your data and, you know, I mean, share the expertise, that'd be a way for you to get off the ground.
Oh, okay.
The other thing I would say is just take a small step, like everything, you know, if you can just come up with like take a small step and make a small success, and you show it, and you can show this to the hospital administrators, and they say, oh, look at the potential here. She's done this little thing and it saved this much money or saved this many lives. Then you get people excited by the possibilities, right? Things always look hard before you get started. If you just make a small step in the right direction, get something done, and then you can build some momentum again. Maybe the hospital administrators will say, look, I believe in what she's doing because she showed us an example that, you know, people need a little bit of proof before they get excited.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the last one is about very basic research and like in the scientific discovery phase. I have heard that some people say that right now the scientific process is redefined because because right now we have machine learning and those tools enable a different process, that it's not only about the human hypothesis generation, but like these other type of possibilities that the machine can provide you like a possibility. But I want to know what's your opinion about that. They said that the frontier of scientific discovery now, it means to have a machine learning tool to aid that. Is it true or not?
Well,
Or how do you see it?
Machine learning certainly has its role. I mean, I didn't quite, I think that science has changed in the sense that we used to do hypothesis, as you say, people have an hypothesis, they would collect data to test it. And now it's very different. Most of the work is exploratory. You have data, you explore, you know, proteins that might relate to a phenotype, and then that exploratory model might lead to new hypotheses. So what you're asking, is machine learning going to, well, machine learning certainly is a useful tool, but it's not the only thing. I mean, for example, in causal inference, I mentioned this, causal inference is not such that you can just take a machine learning algorithm and throw it at the data, okay? Causal inference, you need a framework for understanding, like you're looking at treatment effects, what assumptions am I making? How do I measure the causal effect? I need a model. Within that model, machine learning is useful, but it's not the whole story, right? And a lot of machine learning people don't realize this. They try to throw the algorithm at the data.
Yeah.
And they get a answer that's completely wrong or just not credible. So you're never going to replace thought. Like some statistical concepts like bias and confounding and causality, those concepts are not going away, right? Okay. Machine learning is a useful way of working in that framework, but I just don't be naive. We can't even think that you can just throw an algorithm at a problem and it solves all the scientific problems. Those challenges are there and they cannot be denied. So science is changing, but not as quickly as people think, I guess I'm saying. There's still, the basic concepts are there and they have to be respected and understood.
Yeah, I guess that they were meant, like causal inference is very important, but with very high dimensionality problems.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's difficult to see,
sure.
And sometimes just randomness can help you to look at the right way. And some sort of combination of.
It requires a combination of human judgment, conceptual understanding, and tools like machine learning. But you need all of those things. Right?
Okay. Thank you very much. It was a privilege to talk with you, and I'll send you an email. Thank you.
Juan Urmeneta.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Dr. Robert. Just give me 1 second to turn on my camera and you can see my face. How are you?
Good, thank you.
You already can see my face?
No,
Yes.
there we go.
No? Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I really like the part about if you have an idea for something, just start working on it because I'm currently in that definition. And hear from someone who already done a lot of things in his professional career, like real nice. But I have a question. You have achieved incredible things as a professional. I want to know if you already found a way to balance your professional life and your personal life. And if you did, how you did it? I want to know some tips in order to balance those lives, professional and personal.
That's a good question. I mean, I've been partly successful. I have 3 children who've been all grown up now. I have a wife who's, I mean, very often telling me, don't work so much, basically. I mean, I love my work so much. I would work most weekends and most evenings if I could, but she provides balance. She says we have this, we have to work on the garden, or we're going to travel here, or so I mean, it's a nice problem to have. Basically, I love my work so much. I would like to work all the time, but I realize that balance is important, and having people around you to remind you of that, like a wife or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, that's really important. Or friends that remind you there's more to life than your work, right? Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robert. I really appreciate that advice and tip. Yeah. Well, nice to meet you.
Thank you. You too.
So is there any other question?
I have one.
Yes.
Okay. In your daily activities, do you think from the statistical point of view?
In my daily activities, do I think statistically? That's a good question. I mean, certainly, when you think about, for example, COVID and, should I get a vaccine? Which vaccine should I get? Should I go to the store? Should I put a mask on and go to the store? Should I risk getting COVID? So sort of statistical thinking enters into my personal life quite a bit. It's not always that easy, as you probably, right? You think as a scientist, you'd be very good at handling uncertainty, but it's not so easy, right? I mean, the risks of getting COVID going to the supermarket are very low, but especially early on in this pandemic, I was terrified of going anywhere, right? Maybe you guys feel the same way. And as time's gone on, I've remained healthy and I've been vaccinated now, so I don't feel quite so worried, but still, I mean, a 95% vaccine success is not 100%. And a 5% chance, a 2% chance of a serious disease is a pretty serious thing for someone my age. So I do think statistically, but it's a struggle, to handle uncertainty like everyone else has. But so that answers the question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And another one is, how do you motivate the students of the importance of statistics?
Well, I mean, through real applications. I involve my students in a lot of the collaborations in the medical school, and it's it's very inspiring because most of the doctors are trying to help people with bad diseases or trying to diagnose disease. So that motivation is pretty easy when they see the application of statistics in important areas, in public health, for example. That's the way I do it. And plus, I try to share my own excitement about the work, and hopefully that rubs off too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And why are your books free?
Why are they free?
Your books online.
Were you asking why are they free?
Yeah.
Well, because first of all, in terms of books, we were one of the first statisticians to do this. In terms of book sales, we were convinced that it would actually help sales. I mean, honestly, so there's 2 reasons. There's so many books out there that if you have a book that's free and the students, when they're undergraduates, they read it online, then they graduate, they get a job, then they might buy your book. So it actually, from a purely financial point of view, it actually helps sales. It doesn't hurt them. I can't prove that, but more importantly, I think it allows people in third world countries like China and India and places that can't afford books, they can read them. That's wonderful. So I mean, so that the reason is, twofold. It doesn't hurt my bottom line, and it's just to try to help people who can't afford to buy books. That's why.
Thank you very much.
Jose Ricardo.
Hello, doctor.
Hi.
I just had a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there a book on statistics or a resource of any kind that you would recommend for someone entering to the field of statistics?
One second, I'm a little late, but I'm gonna just tell the person.
No problem.
It's okay. I'm just, is there a book I would recommend to people beginning in statistics? So is this for yourself?
Yes.
So
Yeah, because I was interested on the field, and I wanted like to see if there's some material that you would recommend.
and your background is what?
Computer science, general computer engineering, software engineering.
Oh, so you know some mathematics then, right? Yes.
Yes, yes, that's right.
So you know computer science, you know a bit of machine learning maybe already too, or?
Not so much machine learning, not so much.
But you know some programming like in Python or Java or R. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
So then I would, well, let's see. Not to be too self-serving, but this book, whoops, is a good place to start. And there's a new edition. We have a new edition coming out probably in about a month, actually, which has new chapters on deep learning, survival analysis, and multiple testing, for example. And this book uses it's R-based. We also have a parallel version coming out probably a few months after that in Python. So there'll be the same book with all the labs will be in Python. So I think that's one good place to start. If you've got some computer science background, and this would be an easy book for you easy way to get into the field, basically.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And it's also, this is available online this is available for free online too, if you go to my website.
Okay, awesome.
And the new version will be available for free after about 6 months, I think. So it's, yeah.
And all your books are published on your website?
Yeah, I can quickly show, yeah, like if I go here, right. The last name is pretty unique, so here we go. I go to research, books. So there's the book. So there's, whoops. You can see this? Yeah. So as an early book on the bootstrap, generalized adaptive models, elements of, this is our big book on statistical learning.
Mhm.
And this is the one I just showed you, and they're all available. See, the PDFs are all here. Okay. And then this is a book on the lasso, which is more recent, more specialized. But I would definitely start with this book, either the first edition or the second edition, which is out in a few months. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, Dr. Tibshirani, for your time.
You're welcome. Well, thank you. Nice to meet everyone, and best of luck to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Doctor.
Thanks.
See you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being with us in this SWIT seminar. Thank you and bye. Goodbye.